So I've noticed from the recordings that I've put up that there's a lot of pausing and blipping and whatnot in the
Mhm.
recording. So I guess that's what you guys are seeing on your end. Sorry about that. There's no Wi-Fi in the monastery here in India, and so I one of the monks here went on pilgrimage and took the little SIM card out of his phone and stuck it in my phone. And so now I've got two SIM cards in my phone, and his we've been having to pay for the Wi-Fi the X because he only gets like 5 gigabytes a month or something. So we purchased 100, but we're on a phone and on a phone in Calcutta, so we're just hoping. Well, it's turned out pretty good actually. It's not undoable, but it's been spotty. So we're jumping into I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, and we're on chapter 39. By itself, nothing has existence. And that takes me to one of my favorite things to remember is the fact that my existence is my assurance since I like to mix the ideas of bhakti yoga and jnana yoga a little bit, because the ultimate reality that we're looking for and to experience in jnana yoga is the beloved of the bhaktis. And so I like to ride a path that has both of them. I enjoy the philosophy, the reality, and the practices of jnana, but I love the warmth and the vibrancy of my relationship with the beloved, with the divine. I like the poetry. And Ramakrishna suggests that that's the path for this age. I used to think it was just bhakti, but I've heard from another senior Swami that really Ramakrishna and Vivekananda both demonstrate kind of a path that is a bhakti jnana. And so I hope nobody's offended that I sometimes talk about the two of them like that, but focus on the jnanic reality, the Advaita aspect of it. But we all must remember that all of the paths end in an Advaitic experience or the knowledge of Advaita. It's not an Advaitic experience because one without a second can't be an experience. But it is the culmination of all the paths. But you get a choice. We've discovered, according to Ramakrishna, that he says God takes a form if the devotee has the devotion to freeze him into a form, and that there are places in the ocean where that form never melts. And so some interesting aspects he's thrown in there. But with all of that, just this idea that nothing exists apart from the divine, or yeah, and we'll use the word divine in the Jnanic sense also, because actually here in I Am That even, Sri Nisargadatta mentions God every now and then. And it's important also to know, again, in Advaita, that it's not God who disappears, it's you, that you are the phantom, you are the unreal, as you see yourself, as you think of yourself, and in this moment. And there's a wonderful, I think I can find it here. I've been reading a book called Drigdrishya Viveka this week, kind of going through it, and there was a paragraph here the other day that I really enjoyed. So I'm going to share it here with you and see if I can find it. Yes, this is verse 17 in the Drigdrishya Viveka here. And he says, a doubt arises here. The embodied self is unreal, and hence liberation is not possible for it. Okay? So the embodied self is not real. And so there is no liberation for it. Again, the Shakshan is ever free, meaning the non-embodied soul, the Atman, that ultimate reality. Again, the Shakshin is ever free. Therefore, no liberation is necessary for it. There is no third entity for whom the scriptures pointing to liberation can be prescribed. Therefore, scriptures become futile. The following stanza removes this doubt by showing that the idea of the embodied self is falsely and superimposed upon the shakshan or witness. And so it's it's what basically needs to happen is that we basically have to return to our ever freeness by detaching ourselves from this false notion that we are changing, that we're in this world. And so I say that because a lot of times Advaitas don't like to do practice. They think, oh, you know, for this exact reason that's in that scripture. But the next 4 verses, which we won't cover because the book's not on Drishya tonight, or the class isn't. But he goes into the next 4 things about why the scriptures are prescribed, because undoing the ignorance that has fastened us to this blindness, to this lack of understanding, has to be undone, seemingly, so that our identity can be broken from it and we can experience our native freedom, which is with us even now. We are what we are even now. It's just that we have tied ourselves to the mind, and because of our identity with mind, we take responsibility for changes. And by taking ownership of things that change, we incur karma. We incur the results of influencing those changes. And even though that's all imaginary, it's very much, we can go to the dream again. It's like your dream, which is nothing but imagination, and yet you are affected by them because you believe yourself to be in the dream. And because you believe yourself to be in the dream, you run from the gangsters that are chasing you through New York. Even though none of it's true, if you want to find your way out of the dream, you're going to have to read the dream scriptures that tell you that you're sleeping, and describe the nature of the dream to you, and then give you a set of practices for at least stepping into a lucid dream, living a dream where you know that you're dreaming. So we're right in the middle of a conversation here, and Srineshwar Gadata, our questioner, is quite frustrated, as he is often, because he keeps running into the same walls, right? Because the ultimate truth is that there's nothing to understand. The truth is that you are not the body, you are not the mind, you are the ever-free self. If you could just believe that or trust that all the way down, that's all that has to happen. And so all of this practice and all of these studies are really building a confidence in the truth of the matter. You know, Sri Nisargadatta says that the only difference between himself and us in our delusion is, he says that when his teacher whispered in his ear, "Thou art that," he said, "I believed him." He said, "You," us, meaning us, the deluded folks here, he says, "You believe that you still have something to do. And because you believe that you have something to do, or that you are not that, then you are in fact having to obey that story. You have to play that story out." And so if you have any notion of yourself as a body, you're in the right class. If you woke up this morning and you didn't know that it was you that woke up, and so you didn't get out, you didn't get the body out of bed, but you were surprised to find yourself drifting, you know, without a body, then you're not in the right class. You need to find one to teach. But as long as you have any sense of the body being yours, that this is your body, you know, if you get up and you wash it with the idea, I'm taking a shower, if you go down and feed it, and you have any choice, you make any choices about breakfast, then know that you're not there yet. And so don't make decisions in your life based on thinking you're there, and decide that I'm not going to the temple anymore, I'm not going to do any practice anymore. You know, that's for dualists. Trust me, if you open the door before you walk through it, you're a dualist. And that's just the hard truth of it. It takes an intense amount of practice to have that realization, and an intense amount of a culture and an environment that supports that cultivation of that level of knowledge, that level of knowing. So he's The questioner started last week, ended with him saying, the mind is consciousness in motion, and consciousness is the conditioned aspect of the self. The unconditioned, nirguna, is another aspect, and beyond lies the abyss of the absolute. And Maharaj says, well, yes, you're quite right. You've put it beautifully. So we are part of the changing because we've identified with mind, and we live as the thought of ourself, which means we live within the world of change, which is the world of thought within the mind. And we think that those thoughts are real, and we think that they involve us, and that they directly relate to us and come from us. And because of that, we wander through the mind, unaware that we are the observer of the mind and not the mind. And so the questioner says, well, I might be right, but these are mere words to me. Hearing and repeating them is not enough. They must be experienced. Maharaj, well, nothing stops you but preoccupation with the outer, which prevents you from focusing on the inner, right? So nothing is stopping you from your realization right now, except for your preoccupation with the outer. And what is the outer? The outer is that which is being observed by the inner witness, right? The outer is the world of change. And it has to be outer because within you there is no change. You are that unchanging reality. So nothing stops you but the preoccupation with the outer, which prevents you from focusing on the inner, right? That's what pulls us out of our meditations all the time, right? That noisy mind. We believe somehow, even if you're sitting there enjoying your separation from it, some thought will pass through the mind that has the word I in it or something like that. And you immediately think, oh, that means me. And suddenly you fall off the razor's edge and you're adrift with the thought of you among us. He says it cannot be helped. You cannot skip your sadhana, okay? Very important point there. You cannot skip this aspect of practice, of sadhana, and just claim in an intellectual knowledge that I'm free, right? Because if I come at you with a drill to drill your teeth and there's no Novocaine, if you were in fact at that state where you didn't have to do practice, I could drill a hole right through your cheek and work on your teeth and you wouldn't even flinch. You know, we look at Ramakrishna when he was in his samadhi and the doctor got up there and started poking at the white of his eye. And there was no reaction. There was no blinking, because that is an Advaitin. That is somebody who has an Advaitic knowledge. So if someone is able to come up to you and poke the whites of your eye without you, one, even being aware of it, and two, I don't know why I keep putting on and taking off my glasses, but and you're not aware of it, then you have to do practice. Now, why do I say that? Because I've run into quite a few, especially Americans, who are Advaitins, who have this odd idea that being an Advaitin somehow excuses us from any of these dualistic practices. Advaita is a realization. It is not a practice. All the practices, all the dualistic practices, and there is no other kind of practice but a dualistic practice, and in Advaita, in the Advaitic knowledge, in that knowledge of one without a second. So it is emphatically important not to put your pin in the map on the top of a mountain you have not reached, right? And to be where you are, to not judge yourself for it, to not be egoistically attached to the condition that you may find yourself in or not, and to just work with the moment and go forward with it. And we will ultimately get to that space that we're already in. So this idea, this fact that we are only held back by our infatuation with the world of change and have placed our identity in it and think of ourselves as being a part of it. So he says, you cannot skip your sadhana. You have to turn away from the world and go within until the inner and outer merge, and you can go beyond the conditioned, beyond anything changing, anything that changes, whether inner or outer. And again, I use Ramakrishna as the example of this. For 6 months, he laid on the ground, immobile, unable to eat, unable to take care of himself at all, because he had no awareness of a body, no awareness of this world. He was the universal. He was everything at once. And he had to have food pushed into his mouth and milk poured down his throat. He had to be rolled over by the devotees who took care of him for 6 months, nursed his body and kept it alive, because otherwise they say that your body won't last more than 12 or 20 days, it's something like that, that your body will drop off. Okay, so that is an Advaita. That is when we have reached that knowledge of the true nature of things. We have to turn away from the world. So the yamas and niyamas are important even to Advaitins. We have to have that self-control. We have to, being ever free does not give you permission to run around wild and crazy. You have to have that self-discipline. You have to have that renunciation. You have to have that focus on practice, even more so, because bhakti is actually the easy path, the easier path, more attuned to the age, according to Ramakrishna. So if we're going to take the path of jnana, then your practice is paramount. And you have to fight, 16 hours of worldliness every day with your practice. And so it has to be a serious practice. It has to be a dedicated practice, And so I make these points because I've run into a lot of misunderstanding. But we can move on now. I won't keep doing this through the whole class. You have to turn away from the world and go within until the inner and outer merge, until you have no idea of inside yourself and outside yourself, the inner world and the outer world, until that barrier is gone. We have to do our practice. We have to do our sadhana. The questioner says, well, surely the unconditioned is merely an idea in the conditioned mind. By itself, it has no existence. It is true, but see, you living as the thought of you also exist in your conditioned mind. If you're feeling and experiencing, then you are not aware that you are not the mind. You are not aware that you are not the body. As long as you're feeling and experiencing, you have placed yourself within the dream. You are a character in the dream, and as a character in the dream, you are subject to the dream. All right? Yeah. So surely the unconditioned is merely an idea, absolutely in the conditioned mind. By itself, it has no existence. That's right. Maharaj, by itself, nothing has existence. Right? There's nothing that has an existence in and of itself, except the one without the second, the one without a second, the divine absolute, Satchitananda. That is the only thing that can exist in and of itself without anything holding it up. You and I exist because we are reflections or images of Satchitananda, right? We don't actually exist, just like we don't actually exist in the dream that we're dreaming at night, and yet we swear that we do. We experience a whole dream, right? But we don't know the truth of the dream until we wake up in the morning. And then we're like, oh gosh, I'm not a butterfly. Okay, everything's back to normal. All right, so by itself, nothing has existence. Everything needs its own absence. To be is to be distinguishable. To be here and not there. To be now and not then. To be thus and not otherwise. Like water is shaped by the container, so is everything determined by conditions or gunas. As water remains water regardless of the vessels, as light remains itself regardless of the colors it brings out, so does the real remain real regardless of conditions in which it is reflected. Why keep the reflection only in the focus of consciousness? Why not the real itself, right? So the water is water, no matter what shape it takes. And you are you whether you are the you in the waking state or the you in the dream state. The character in the dream, the little fuzzy bunny that you became in your dream last night, is the same you as this funny looking man or woman that you are right now, who's pretending to age and pretending to be well or sick or whatnot, who's disciplining themselves to listen to this class. You know, this conditioned self is real only because that which left it in order to step into the dream gives it existence, right? Just like your dream character last night doesn't exist right now. It can't exist without you attaching to it, without you believing it's you, without you having a reflection in mind. So that's between dream and waking state. But here in the waking state, it's happening now between this dream and the unknown waking state within which we actually are, in a manner of speaking, you know. And so that same self, that unchanging part of you, is the real you, and it has no attributes. The last thing that can be said about it before merging is, what love, what being, what wisdom. Those will be the last three words out of your mouth as you dissolve into the infinite ocean of bliss. Right? Questioner, well, consciousness itself is a reflection. How can it hold the real? Right? Well, consciousness is itself a reflection, yes. The truth, that which has no reflection, with no objects, as we know, is awareness. Awareness with objects in it, meaning awareness, once it moves into mind or moves into the reflection of mind, it becomes consciousness. So to know consciousness itself is a reflection, how can it hold the real? Right? Well, it doesn't hold the real. The real holds it. Right? It doesn't hold the real holds it. To know that consciousness and its content are but reflections, Maharaj says, changeful and transient, is the focusing of the real. The refusal to see the snake in the rope is the necessary condition for seeing the rope. Okay? So to know that consciousness and its content are but reflections, that means to never lose the awareness that all that is changing is unreal. And all the time, knowing the real, not because you can see it, feel it, or detect it, you cannot. You might have feelings that are telling you that, you might have thoughts that are telling you that, but that is the lie. That is Maya. The self cannot be seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled. It is everywhere present, always perfect, unchanging, absolute. The only way to find it is through the negation of the conditioned. Not this, not this, not this. And that's why that important exercise of going within and knowing what it means when you say, I'm not the body, and knowing what it means when you say, I am not the mind, right? So to know that consciousness and its content are but reflections, changeful and transient, is the focusing of the real, the refusal to see the snake in the rope. Right, to sit there, even though in the dim light of night, you saw that snake in the rope, you jumped all the way up on the counter, now you're throwing things at it, and you have to come to the point where you realize, oh, it's just a rope. But your sadhana in that case would be anything that you're throwing at the rope on the ground in order to realize it's not reacting, it's not eating you, and it's not pursuing you. Oh, it's just a rope, right? Know that until you did some practice, till you did some investigating, some searching, and realizing, oh no, it's a piece of rope, it's not a snake. So he says, the refusal to see the snake in the rope is the necessary condition for seeing the rope. So there is a condition that is necessary in order to escape all conditions. That's the removal of a delusion. That's the removal of a delusion. So the questioner says, well, only necessary or also sufficient? Maharaj, one must also know that a rope exists and looks like a snake. Similarly, one must know that the real exists and is of the nature of witness consciousness. Of course, it is beyond the witness, but to enter it, one must first realize the state of pure witnessing. The awareness of conditions brings one to the unconditioned, right? The awareness of conditionings brings one to the unconditioned, right? So this is what we mean when we're always saying, let the changing point to the unchanging in you that's necessary for you to see that something is changing, right? If you're standing on the train as it's moving, you're not going to necessarily know that the train is moving. If you're standing at the train station and the train goes by, you know the train is moving. So this self within you is the still point. It's the unchanging. So everything that you're observing at this moment that is changing, all of your senses, all of your thoughts, all of your experiences, all of that should constantly indicate, you cannot forget this for one split second in a day. You must be in constant awareness that you are not the changing, that you are observing this changing. And the idea would be that this dream then would become a lucid dream for you. You would understand at every moment, wow, I'm dreaming, this is amazing. And you would walk around thinking, this is amazing, I'm dreaming, this is amazing, right? And you would see it as a dream, and you would know that it wasn't real, and you would be in charge of it. You could say to this mountain, get up and throw yourself in the sea, and boom, it does it. You know, it's like Ramakrishna when he said, I'm going to build a fence around the Panchavati, and suddenly on the banks of the Ganges, the nails, the hammers, the wood, all of the fastenings, everything necessary for building that wall washes up on the side of the sea, on the side of the banks, right? So it's like that, to live lucidly, to know that you are dreaming, and to know that this dream is within you. You are not within this dream. That is awakening. That is knowing. That is knowledge. And then there's a state beyond it, deep sleep, that we can point to deep sleep, although deep sleep is not it, because deep sleep is deep tamasic, right? Whereas realization is well beyond the gunas, but certainly one step outside of sattva, outside of harmony, outside of balance. All right, so one must know that the rope exists and looks like a snake. Similarly, one must know that the real exists and is of the nature of witness consciousness. So you have to know this distinction between witness and change, witness and consciousness, witness and objects. Of course, it is beyond the witness. Of course, both of those things are going to become part of the unity, ultimately. But to enter it, one first has to realize the state of pure witnessing. You still have to come to that point of lucid dreaming, where you're understanding, wow, this is incredible. The awareness of conditions brings one to the unconditioned, right? Because all of the conditions will be constantly indicating the unconditioned, which is aware of them. Because you have to be unconditioned in order to know a condition. If you were born with your hands tied, you would never seek to fix it, because you would just think, oh, my hands have always been tied. This is what's normal. This is what's natural, right? So you have to become aware that your hands are tied and that that's not normal. That's not your nature. And then you have to go through the work of untying your hands so that you then have two hands and you're free. And so it's like that. Let me see if we've got something going on here. I can fix it just a moment. All right. Very good. All right. So it goes on here. Oops. What is that? Okay. All right. I just muted everybody, so feel free to unmute for anything that you want to unmute for. All right. To know the conditioned as conditioned is all that can be said about the unconditioned. Positive terms are mere hints and misleading. Okay, so it's only through negation is what he's saying. Not this, not this, not this. Because to say anything positive is to give it an attribute. And all attributes, no matter what they are a limitation. And that which you are is utterly unlimited. It has no attribute. Just like whatever it is that creates your dream, right? And I love this idea because it gives you an idea of Brahman as Shakti. That in your dream, everything in there is made of the same stuff. You know, as you walk around that dream of yours, everything in there is made of the same stuff. There's no space between objects in the dream, right? You can see that mountain range 150 miles away. There's no mountain range 150 miles away. It's all part and parcel of this mind stuff that has become everything, the mountains, the water. And I always use the dream because we can so easily understand that. Normally we're thinking about the waking state, and it doesn't make any sense to us because we think it's real, right? So to know the conditioned as conditioned is all that can be said about the unconditioned. Positive terms are mere hints and misleading. So you have to come to know that it's the same substance that's creating everything. So you have to look at that dream hand and not see the hand. You have to recognize the substance that is pretending to be a hand, right? It's like going to the movie and never forgetting that it's a white screen. So you're completely unaffected by the story of the movie because you are so busy focused on that unchanging white screen behind the film, behind the dancing colors. So you never get pulled into the narrative. You never get pulled into the story, right? You see why this is such a high state. You have to live this world with your eyes on the divine, the unchanging divine, knowing that none of this is real, and not get pulled into the narrative. If you're going to work and writing books and singing songs and catching buses, you are in the narrative, right? There's no way out of it because you can't step into the narrative unless you believe it to be real. You can't enjoy the movie unless you think that the narrative is happening, that the narrative is real. So he says, can we talk of witnessing the real? Maharaj, how can we? We can talk only of the unreal, the illusory, the transient, the conditioned. Why? Because frankly, words require time-space causation, subject, object, verb. If you're going to talk about something, it has to be in the mind, because the mind is what provides time-space causation, subject, object, verb. So that's why we can't talk about Advaita, and that is why Advaita is not a path. It is the realization. It's the cherry on the top. So how can we talk about witnessing the real? We can talk only of the unreal, the illusory, the transient, the conditioned. To go beyond, we must pass through total negation of everything as having independent existence. All things depend, right? The dreamer's mind has to be there for the dream to happen, because it is the dreamer's mind that is the reality upon which the dream is mapped. So in this world, Brahman, that dream stuff that has become everything you're experiencing right now, it has become this. We have to see it. We have to look beyond the form. So we have to negate it. We have to say, no, that's not a bed. That is Brahman. No, that's not a car. That is Brahman. And when that begins happening, that we have some stories of Ramakrishna or Vivekananda as he began to move into that knowledge. You know, he almost got hit by a bus because he saw the bus coming and didn't get out of the way because the bus was unreal and he was unreal. What's the problem if I get hit by a bus? Right? So that's the level of reality we're talking about. He used to go along and have to bang his head on the iron fence to try and convince himself that it was real so that he could come back into the body, come back into the dream and act as Vivekananda, you know, to play his part as Vivekananda. And so that's the thing, you know, we have to, that's the truth of this. Advaita is not an idea. It is not a philosophy. It is the reality. And to know it is to bang your head on a fence to convince yourself it's real, is to not to get out of the way of rushing traffic because you know it and yourself to be unreal, right? So this, I'm just driving home what a pristine state this is, how pure it is, and how absolutely devoid of any notion of being you has to be. To know, to come to this knowledge, to come to this, whatever it is. There's not a word for it, and don't make one up. All right. So he says, we must pass through total negation of everything as having independent existence. All things depend. Questioner, on what do they depend? Maharaj, on consciousness. And consciousness depends on the witness. And the witness depends on the real? That's his question. The witness is the reflection of the real in all of its purity, right? So since the witness is still seeing other, the oneness hasn't happened. That's why they call it one without a second. So the witness is the reflection of the real in all of its purity, right? And whenever the word purity there comes up, you can just put the words me and mine in there. That's what purity means, to have no sense of me and mine, which means no sense of me and you, right? To have that ultimate purity. But if you're a reflection, right, you do have a you do have a me rather, but it's in its purest form, like an incarnation. It's at its purest form. There's only like one desire holding it, holding it in manifestation. You know, like for Ramakrishna, the love of the devotees, that was his one desire. Or he would come down from samadhi by saying, I want a jalebi, or I need some water, right? He would have a single desire that would bring him back into the manifested world so that he could use a body and communicate with the rest of the dream. So the witness is the reflection of the real in all of its purity. It depends on the condition of the mind. Where clarity and detachment predominate, the witness consciousness comes into being, okay? Where clarity and detachment predominate. Clarity means seeing things without a story, so seeing them as they are and not as the mind is describing them to you. To see them outside of time, to not be subject to change, right? To see that clarity and detachment, which means that you understand at the most fundamental level, it has nothing to do with me. These thoughts that I'm watching in this mind are not my thoughts. They have nothing to do with me, right? So though that clarity and that detachment, when they predominate, then you come to this witness consciousness. Then you come to be a lucid dreamer. You walk as an enlightened soul through the world, right? Your light of love, which is your nature, shines with equanimity. There's no mind to be selfish. There's no mind to give more love to something else than to something else. You see consciousness in everything. So you're talking to leaves, you're talking to flowers, you're talking to trees, you're talking to people, you're talking to God. All of these things, you see the consciousness, you see Satchitananda has become all of this. That is the witness consciousness state, when you know everything to be yourself, but still have a point of reference, but just a point of reference. You know that there's no body there. You know that there's no mind there. There's no opinions there. There's nothing but the awareness of consciousness. It is just like saying that where the water is clear and quiet, the image of the moon appears, or like daylight that appears as a sparkle in the diamond. Questioner, can there be consciousness without the witness? Without the witness, it becomes unconsciousness, just living. The witness is latent in every state of consciousness, just like light in every color. There can be no knowledge without the knower, and no knower without his witness. Not only you know, but you know that you know. Right. I had a conversation, a wonderful conversation with Swami Priyananda on the veranda outside my room yesterday. And we were talking about this, and he said the sin of Adam was that he wanted to know when he was knowledge himself itself. Right? The sin of Adam was that he wanted to know when he was knowledge itself. And so he ate of the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the fruit of the knowledge of separateness, the fruit of the knowledge, egoism, right? He took an ego and became that, and then looked at himself through that ego, from the vantage point of that ego. So there can be no knowledge without the knower, no knower without his witness. Not only you know, but you know that you know. Right? And so you're aware of awareness. That's the highest, that's probably the highest state for a normal person. Beyond that is the incarnations can go up and down. If we hit that state, the body drops, right? The body falls off. You won't find yourself back into the dream. It's gone. Questioner. If the unconditioned cannot be experienced, for all experience is conditioned, then why talk of it at all? Of course, that's a great question. Why are you asking the question? Right? That's the question. Why am I asking a question? Maharaj, how can there be knowledge of the conditioned without the unconditioned? There must be a source from which all of this flows, a foundation on which it all stands. Self-realization is primarily the knowledge of one's conditioning and the awareness that the infinite variety of conditions depends on our infinite ability to be conditioned and to give rise to variety. To the conditioned mind, the unconditioned appears as the totality, as well as the absence of everything. Neither can be directly experienced, but this does not make it non-existent or not existent, right? So neither can be directly experienced. Why? Because if everything, if it's the totality, where's the experiencer? If you separate out an experiencer, you're no longer a totality. You're a totality and an experiencer, right? So the totality can't be spoken of. So it can be seen from the conditioned mind. You can think of it as the totality, or you can take the Buddhist approach and see it as void, as nothingness. It doesn't matter. There's no one to look at it, so it doesn't matter how you describe it. Call it twinkle if you want, you know, call it snort, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. If you call it anything, you're wrong. So the totality, this reality of ourself, this one without a second, beyond change, for us to grasp that in our mind, we simply think of something that's unchanging, right? I had a beautiful experience of this the other night. Actually, it was morning, but it was night out. I was walking, I just visited Mother's Temple, and I'd come around the corner and I saw the full moon in the trees, and there were some misty clouds blowing in front of it. And I saw for just a moment, I just got that lesson. I saw the unchanging moon, you know, within the relative, the moon doesn't change. It was just sitting there. And I saw that mist kind of move in front of it. And I thought immediately, I saw that the whole world I was looking at was that mist that was blowing in front of the moon of the reality, you know, and just was looking and having that experience of watching, just watching, not identifying with anything, just watching and realizing that I just was seeing the perfect example of what I was experiencing in that moment, that this unchanging moon was making me aware of the changing clouds in front of it. And I am that unchanging moon, and it makes me aware of all the change of the world that I'm experiencing through my senses, right? So I see my senses as a flat canvas, and I see all the change that's being represented, but I know myself to be the canvas. I know myself to be the unchanging that allows me to see the changing, right? You cannot see the changing if you are changing. You have to have, you have to be out of the system in order to see all of the change, all the varieties of change. So to the conditioned mind, the unconditioned appears as the totality as well as the absence of everything. So both the Vedantist and the Buddhist are right. It is void and it is Brahman. It's fullness and it's emptiness. Either one, take your pick. Neither can be directly experienced, right? Because nothingness, how do you experience nothing? You can't experience nothing. And so how do you experience everything all at once? You can't, because you would be the thing itself. But he says this doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. This does not make it not existent. So the questioner is it not a feeling? This is a good question, because a lot of times we get feelings in our meditations. We get a feeling of oneness. We get a feeling of unconditioned love, right? We get these feelings, and they're wonderful pointers. They're not a negative thing at all, but they are not the thing itself, right? You may feel love, right? And that is because of the presence of God, but you're feeling a condition based on the presence of God. You're not feeling God, right? You're feeling the changing, you're feeling what love feels like when it's in the changing world, when it's in the mind. But you're not feeling the noun of love, because the noun of love can't be felt because it doesn't change. A feeling too is a state of mind. Just like a healthy body does not call for attention, so is the unconditioned free from experience. Take the experience of death. The ordinary man is afraid to die because he is afraid of change. The Jnani is not afraid because his mind is dead already. He does not think, I live. He knows there is life. There is no change in it and no death. Death appears to be a change in time and space. Where there is neither time nor space, how can there be death? The Jnani is already dead to name and shape. How can their loss affect him? The man in the train travels from place to place, but the man off the train goes nowhere. Just a moment, somebody just popped in. The Jnani is already dead to name and shape. How can the loss affect him? The man in the train travels from place to place, but the man off the train goes nowhere, for he is not bound for a destination. He has nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to become. Those who make plans will be born to carry them out. Those who make no plans need not be born. There you are. That's why they talk about be here now. Don't be in a plan. Be here now. What I call the plan a story. Don't tell yourself stories. See the moment and have no opinion about it. See the moment and have no plan for it. Just accept it as it is. And you'll watch the body do what the body does, and you'll watch the mind do what the mind does, but you will know that I'm watching. I'm not doing. I'm unchanging. Right? You can see the wonderful peace of that state. You know, your unchanging self is that peace that passes understanding, that peace that is not of the mind. Right? A peace of mind is an impossibility. Peace only comes when you step outside of mind. When you step outside of the story, when you step outside of the constantly shifting conditions, only then can you find stability. And stability is what's necessary for peace. What is the purpose of pain and pleasure? Maharaj, do they exist by themselves or only in the mind? Well, questioner, well, still they exist. Never mind the mind. Maharaj says, pain and pleasure are merely symptoms, the results of wrong knowledge and wrong feeling. A result cannot have a purpose of its own. So pain and pleasure are symptoms. They are having a wrong idea or even a right idea of the self. It's still, you still have to have that point of reference. You still have to believe yourself to be in the changing. Because if there's nothing to blow past your face, then there's nothing to feel. So you have to step into it. Pain and pleasure are merely symptoms, the results of wrong knowledge and wrong feeling, right? Thinking yourself to be changing and thinking yourself to be separate. The result cannot have a purpose of its own. That's why God is called the original cause, right? That's why they say that realization has no cause. You are already that. Nothing makes you that. There is no cause for you to be you. You are you by nature, right? If you have a cause, that's because you're dealing with the thought of you. You've put yourself in the mind. You've identified with the mind. And now your thoughts affect you. And everything is a thought. All right. 9:26. It's a good place to stop for this week.